Welcome to Grieving Insomniacs. I am your host, Christy Haberman. I am glad you're here. Thanks for being a part of our community. A few disclaimers before we get started. I am a licensed therapist. However, this podcast is not to be considered mental health therapy or counseling. It is for entertainment purposes only and is not associated with my counseling practice, Christy Haberman Counseling Services. Thanks for showing up. Welcome to Grieving Insomniacs. This is your host, Christy Haberman, and Kai the Wonder Dog. I don't think she's sleeping back there behind me, so you may hear her clanking. I assure you that it's Kai and not a ghost, since we're getting close to Halloween. And I've been thinking all week about what to talk about today on the podcast. And as I was reviewing my podcast episodes, I realized that the ones that get the most airplay are the ones that I talk about more personal topics on. So I thought today I would talk about what happened with my family when Christopher died. And I tell these stories not to shame anyone, because I don't use any names. I tell these stories because I've learned over the last 11 years, that we have more in common than we have differences. And I feel it's so important when it comes to grief that we be, one, allowed to talk about it, but two, that you not feel alone. And that, for me, was one of the hardest parts of my grief, especially in the beginning. So if you're one of those people that are just in the beginning of your grief and you're feeling alone, I encourage you to reach out, listen to the podcast, or even send me a message. Because I don't want anyone to feel like they're going through this journey alone. It is hard enough for us to be grieving parents and feel like you're alone. So I have to explain my family dynamics a little bit in order for this story to be really understood. So I am adopted. I lived with my biological mother and my adopted father. That I didn't find out I was adopted until I was 25. Yeah, that's quite the story. It's not really about grief, but if you'd like to hear it, send me a message, because it's quite a doozy. And I have one brother, one sister, and I am the oldest. So I have, my mom's parents are divorced. So I had a grandmother, grandfather, well, I guess it'd be a step grandfather and grandmother. And then I've had a grandfather and a step grandmother, but the step grandmother had died. And I think my mom's dad had died by the time Christopher had died. And then, so my current husband is Christopher's stepfather. I was a single parent when I had him. So he has an adopted father and he has a biological father. Are you confused yet? Yeah, quite the interesting story, isn't it? All right. So when I was growing up, I have an aunt and an uncle on my biological mom's side. And I have an aunt on my adopted dad's side. Well, I have two of them. But Donna had died before Christopher had died. And then my husband's family, his mom was still alive, and one of his sisters was still alive. Well, actually, two of his sisters were still alive. So when Christopher died that year, in December of 2010, my husband's father died. And I think it was Easter weekend. No, wait, I got this confused. His dad died in December. I'm pretty sure it was Easter weekend or the weekend before Easter that his sister died. 24 hours later, his brother-in-law had a massive heart attack while he was mowing the lawn at his mother's house. I just can't even imagine that. And he was in his 60s, so she must have been in her 80s. It's traumatic. So when I was growing up, I had 3 cousins, female cousins, that lived with us for about 2 years. It was my mom's sister. They kind of had a contentious relationship, you would say, and we lost contact with them. And then as we became older adults, we reconnected. I always considered these women family. I considered them sisters. I get teary-eyed thinking about it. I thought that we were close. Really, really close. I thought that I could reach out. In fact, I don't want to say stupid, but I was so stupid that I moved back to South Dakota. My husband wanted to go to Florida. I moved back to South Dakota to be closer to my dad, be closer to my sister, and to be closer to my cousins. Worst mistake I've ever made is moving back to South Dakota. It was a good thing for my youngest son. I try to keep that in mind, but for me personally and professionally, it was a really bad idea. And I'd only been back a very few amount of years. So anyway, I moved back to South Dakota to be closer to these people. We had never experienced the loss of a young person in our family. I mean, my grandmother died in 2006. I saw her maybe once every 10 years. It was sad, but I just didn't have the attachment to her. My grandfather had died. My grandmother on my dad's side was still alive. So we had never really experienced death as a family. And now when I think about it, it's amazing to me. Like, I hear of families that lost family members to suicide or car accidents or serious illnesses. We just didn't. So Christopher dying was the first person that was young that died in our family. And right after the funeral, it was great. Everyone showed up except for one cousin. She did not show up. And my brother's sister did not show up. And for those of you that out there that question these relationships that you have in the family, say you have a stepchild, your husband has a stepchild, your sister has a stepchild. My husband will not talk to his sister because she told him when Christopher died that she didn't have time to come to the funeral. They had too much going on. And he will not forgive her? Oh, he will not forgive her. And she questions frequently. And I think they blame me, but I have nothing to do with this. They question frequently why he will not call them. And it was like, you told them that his child, someone that he believed that was his child, He didn't need to adopt him to believe that it was his child. That they didn't have time. But we're all caught up in the funeral. Everybody shows up. You have the family. You have the reception. It's the aftermath that it became more difficult. I was so alone. I couldn't sleep. Those first few months were horrible. Well, that's not true, actually. I couldn't sleep. So I got trazodone, which is a sleep med. It's also an antidepressant, but it's a sleep medication. And so when you first start taking trazodone, you sleep a lot. But it wasn't restful sleep. And my mind was racing all the time. And my heart was so, so broken. But everybody disappeared. Now my son, my youngest son, moved back to South Dakota from Aberdeen. And we've never really talked about it. Why he did that. Part of me thinks that he did that to watch out for me. In the end, I think it turned out to be a good thing for them. But in my immediate family, it was good. What wasn't good was the extended family. People just kind of disappeared. They didn't reach out anymore. And my cousin Courtney, she's the one that hurt me the most. I can see her house from where I am. She didn't talk to me for the first year after Christopher died. She could see my house. We were Facebook friends back then. I think for the first year after Christopher died, I got off Facebook. There were some issues with his friends that maybe on one of these podcasts I'll talk about. I think it might come up frequently when people have adult children that die. Maybe I'll do that topic for next week. But I could see my cousin Courtney from my house. No one came around me. No one came to visit. Nothing. I didn't have any contact with my friends. That's a whole nother different conversation. So I was extremely isolated. And so I asked myself, did I isolate myself? Or was I just isolated? And I think about this one, and I might have I'll talk about it in a little bit more detail. Now, I might have talked about it for a few times. I would, about 6 months in, and I have noticed this working with grieving people, that the grief got worse at 6 months. Like so much worse. It's like you come out of the shock at 6 months. Well, conventional wisdom, according to the DSM-5, is that at 6 months you should be, over your grief. Otherwise, it turns into major depression. Yeah, no, I just don't agree with that whole category. But so my 6 months was at January, and I was extremely, extremely depressed and isolated. I would come home, get into my pajamas, and wear those same pajamas all weekend, and I started working on a memory quilt for Christopher. And one of the things that me and my husband do is we go garage selling together. And so this probably would have been about April time frame. And it was one of those weekends, and I was just like, I don't want to get out of the car. I'll just wear a hat. And we go to this garage sale, and I see my cousin Courtney. Now, I had not seen her since Christopher died. Keeping in mind that I can see her house from my house. Since it's not that far, I can see. So disturbing. So I go up. Yes, I probably looked like hell. Yes, I probably was very, very depressed, but it should not matter. So I see her. She runs away from me. Literally runs away from me. And I'm chasing her going, Courtney, Courtney. She looks at me like scared like and keeps going. And I'm like, what just happened? I felt so bad. I went back to my car and I just cried. Because you see, she wasn't just my cousin. I thought she was my sister. So heartbreaking. And then I started to realize, you know what? My cousin Casey never showed up for the funeral. She had an excuse. She said that her husband was having surgery. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, right? At the time, she said, my husband can't travel. He's got this serious surgery. I was like, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. But she never called me again. Ever. It's been 11 years, and I still haven't heard from Casey. So heartbreaking. So then I, and my cousin Carrie, didn't hear from her either. I think in 2014, we all got together, and I'm giving everybody the benefit of the doubt, right? Just everybody. And I shouldn't have. In hindsight, I shouldn't have. So I'm trying to think. I wrote my book in 2015. It was a self-published book. I was so proud of that thing. My Aunt Kathy had moved to town. Now, this would be my mom's sister. And I had moved to town. So I went to go see her. She was someone I really looked up to. She was someone that was really important to me until this moment in time. Of course, operating underneath the illusion that these people were closer than cousins, closer than aunt. So I took my book over to her and I was showing it to her. And she was too busy watching The Walking Dead. And I was telling her about the book that I read. And that woman looked at me and told me that I did not like Jesus enough. And that's why I was grieving so hard. And I just started crying. Now we're watching, if any of you have seen The Walking Dead, it's all about killing people. Like the scene that I saw on the TV is that one of the zombies was eating a horse and she's talking about being a God-fearing Christian. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? You have no empathy, no compassion for me, and preaching at me, saying that the reason why I was grieving so hard is because I didn't love God enough. And if I would have had God in my life, I would not be as sad as I was. And I was just like, I had a dinner I was going to go to with my son's family that night. It's one of the few times we had been invited over. And I went home and I cried. And I remember telling my husband, if I could have felt better, if I could have been less sad, I would have found a way. I didn't enjoy being that sad. I was so sad. Just heartbreaking now when I think about it. I was actually, haven't really talked to her since then, understandably. But as the years ticked by, I started to realize that as far as my extended family goes, I operated underneath the illusion that they cared. And they didn't. They didn't. So my brother-in-law died in 2016. My cousin's husband. So I went to the funeral. And I kid you not, my cousin Courtney asked me what I was doing there. I'm like, what? My cousin's husband died. I'm coming to the funeral because that's what family does, right? That's what family does. My Aunt Kathy was there and she was mad that we were there. What are you doing here? What do you mean? We're family. I thought we were family. So we stayed through the funeral, and this is when it really hit home. And they were like, oh, we're going to get family pictures after everybody leaves. I'm thinking we're included in the family, right? Ha ha ha. Not even close. Not even close. So I go home, and I see all the pictures taken afterwards, after we left. Oh, we got all the cousins together, blah, blah, blah. And I realized that day that they didn't consider me family. I wasn't family. It was really hard. It was really hard. And that's the last time I talked to him. That's not true. I took pictures of the funeral at the funeral home and of the family, and of course they all blew a gasket because how dare I take pictures? Just like, whatever. These people aren't important to me. Not at all. And I realized over the last few years, did Christopher's death destroy our family? Or did my illusions just get shattered when Christopher died? I'm still not real sure. But the reason why we're talking about this is I had a dream last night. I had a dream about the three of them. Well, actually, it's four because my Aunt Kathy was there. And in the dream, they were asking me, why don't you talk to us anymore? And I was like, I quit trying. It takes two people to have a relationship. In this case, it would have been me having a relationship with all of them. It takes two people. And I can't continue to try and continue to be rejected. And I vividly remember from my dream telling them, I just wanted to be included. That's all I wanted, was to be included. And I needed that after Christopher died. And I didn't have that. I still don't have that. The holidays are the absolute worst. I have a holiday story I'm going to tell. I'm waiting to the holidays to tell it. It's just heartbreaking. So I am always alone on the holidays. Well, Colin comes over for Thanksgiving. It's not always on Thanksgiving. You know, you make do because you're sharing a family with the in-laws. I mean, that's just how that goes. But extended family, I'm alone. I'm still alone. And if I didn't have Christmas, I learned a couple of years ago that if I want to be included for Christmas, it has to be at my house. And if it wasn't at my house, I wouldn't be included. And is all of that because Christopher died? I don't know. But it's been one of the toughest consequences of him dying is losing that sense of family. And really understanding that I am alone. And I'm alone in my grief. And even now, like it's been 11 years. On Christopher's birthday, I don't think family remembers the day he died. They don't remember. I talk about my memories of him. They don't acknowledge it. Can you imagine that? Like you're having a conversation with people and you talk about him and they just look at you in stunned silence. He was alive. He existed. And so I'm working at replacing my family, my extended family, which is just me and my son and my husband. My cousins, I just consider myself divorced. I'm pretty sure I said that in my dream. Oh, I divorced you. I'm not going to say the words I said, but I said I'm divorcing you. And I just don't have anything to do with it. So if you're in that situation where your family has disappeared, I encourage you to find a new family. Create a new family within you. I'm my own best friend. I have a best friend, love her dearly, but I'm also okay being alone. So for those of you that might be in my situation where your family just kind of disappeared, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that that's happening to you. I don't know how normal it is. If you would, leave me a podcast and talk to me about, leave me a message. Let me know what your family's like. I hear families coming together. I get so jealous because I would have liked that to have been my family, but that's not how it went. So thank you for listening. I would love to hear your stories. If you'd like to tell your story, reach out. If you just like to write to me to tell me your story, I can read it for you. I've heard from a couple of people. I'm looking forward to having you on the podcast. Every time I get to tell a story, someone's story, I feel like I'm fulfilling a life purpose. So thank you for listening. This is Christy signing off, and Kai the Wonder Dog, and you have a great week.